Hello and welcome to LA Currents. I'm Saida Pagan. Our focus today is on homelessness. It is probably the biggest crisis that Los Angeles has had to face thus far in the 21st century. How did it get to this point and when will it decrease? Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell is here with some answers. He is chairperson of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee of the Los Angeles City Council. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Saida. Good to be here.
Yes, let's begin by talking about how widespread homelessness is in our city.
So homelessness has never been more widespread in Los Angeles than it is right now. We do one major count a year, and it's called the point-in-time count. And it's a county-wide assessment of the numbers of people experiencing homelessness. In the county of Los Angeles, which we all know there are 88 cities in the county, Los Angeles is one of them, there are some 59,000 people experiencing homelessness. But in the city of Los Angeles, city of 4 million in a county of 10 million, we have a little over 36,000 human beings that are unhoused, according to the 2019 point-in-time count.
Is that right? Now, we know that a lot of times the homeless population is faceless.
Right.
We don't really know who they are. So tell us, I know you've been speaking with them, tell us who they are and how do many of them get to this point?
So there are as many reasons for people being homeless as there are people that are homeless. People experiencing homeless are youth who have left home for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes, they are terrible reasons they have to leave home. So we deal with runaways. We also deal with people who have lived life on the economic margins and have just been priced out and no longer available to afford rent. We have people who have been professionals, very successful in their lives, that had a bad turn. Perhaps they have addiction issues or they have mental health episodes that have left them homeless and isolated. So homeless people are you and me. They're everyone. They're relatives. I've talked to families who don't really know how to approach their homeless brother or sister and haven't known how to deal with a family member being homeless, in some cases for decades. So they represent really everyone, all classes, all racial demographics, although a lot of demographics are overrepresented in our homeless numbers, and that has to be looked at too.
And I think a lot of times people forget that it can be anyone.
Yes.
Anyone can fall into homelessness, is that correct?
That's correct, and in fact, our increased numbers of newly homeless often are families or people that have they're so rent burdened, meaning they pay way over 30% of their household income, in some cases 50, 60, 70, 80% of their income is paid just to keep rent and a roof over their head. They are the newly homeless. And so we have to figure out how to rapidly rehouse people who are newly experienced homelessness, who might have an income. Those are probably the easiest people to help, but the longer someone stays homeless chronically, the more difficult it is to then get them into housing and get them back on track for a productive, fulfilling way of life.
Now, I know that you're out in the community talking about this issue and about this problem, trying to find solutions. Do you have a couple of stories that you can share with us about people that you've met on the streets of Los Angeles?
Sure. Well, we have examples of stories that didn't end up so well and examples of stories that are much more promising. I'll start with one that didn't end up so well, which it gives you a window into the, one example of homelessness that people are affected by. There was an individual in Echo Park, a man that everyone knew. I had crossed paths with him on occasion, going to visit the encampment where he used to live. And he was a victim of homicide. And it has never been solved, but strongly suspected that it was another homeless individual. And when we took a look at his life, we learned that he had an apartment. He had an apartment nearby that he chose not to live in because he felt better living under the 101 bridge. So that's one really strange situation, but it's true. people who are experiencing homelessness come from all walks of life, and they have all sorts of mental episodes that they suffer with. Another case is much more promising. We opened a bridge housing in Hollywood back in February, and that's 72 beds. That's transitional housing with services on site. And one of the clients there is a young man who is an engineer, a professional, who moved to Los Angeles, was successful in his work, but ended up homeless because he had an interruption with his job. And so we were able to fairly rapidly rehouse him, and he was one of the first recipients of receiving a bed, and he's now in casework, and he is on a pathway to another job in the engineering field. So there are success stories, and in order to accommodate those success stories, we need more inventory. Bridge housing shelters and then permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. We have our work cut out for us, but Angelenos have helped us. In 2016, they have approved Measure HHH, which is a $1.2 billion bond approving up to 10,000 units of permanent supportive housing. These are homes, permanent, for people who are unhoused. And we're having great strides in that arena.
Absolutely. Going back to the victims of homelessness, the people who are experiencing homelessness, you mentioned families. Tell us a little bit about maybe some of the families that you might have seen. Have you seen any?
I have. And so recently in Echo Park, in working with Gateways Hospital and another organization, we recently we're housing up to, I think it's in the 20s, families in Echo Park in partnership with Gateways Hospital, and they are a mental health institution. And they have these bungalows that they've refurbished, and they're lovely, and families are moving in. And some of the testimony from some of those families is very, very heartwarming and sad. But we know that they're getting housed, they're receiving the services they need, and that includes everything: clinical services, children and family health services from the county, and also job opportunities for the moms and some dads who are families experiencing homelessness. But we need to accommodate more families. We have to give children the stability so they don't have to go to different schools and get pulled in 1,000 different directions. They need a safe space. And that's what this Gateways Hospital facility offers them.
Marvelous. Let's talk a little bit about your plan. Now, you've come up with a very extensive and comprehensive plan to deal with homelessness in Los Angeles. And I know one part of that plan is protecting tenants and preserving rent stabilization units. Can you give us a little more information on that?
Yeah, I think that there's not enough focus of attention on just preserving what we have, because that keeps people housed longer. Right? So we have a couple of state laws that interface with our ability to keep people housed in Los Angeles. One of them is the Ellis Act. The Ellis Act allows anyone who owns a property, it's a property rights law essentially, who might have a multifamily building that they own. They can themselves choose to get out of the business and then no longer have that property as a rental property. Oftentimes, it is under the ordinance of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance, so that means rent control. Some property owners want to get out of that business, and they have every right to legally because of property rights in the state of California. I feel that the Ellis Act makes it really easy for people to get out of the business, especially at this time with this, the real estate market being so hot and the trend of everyone wanting to live at the urban core. The real estate market at the urban core is just so steaming hot that you can make a lot of money by getting out of the rental business. A lot of these owners either choose to leave the business or they flip their buildings or they sell them to LLCs. They will then invoke Ellis. It's a simple filing. And then they send notices, and within 3 months, the tenants, some who have been there 10, 20, 30, 40 years, have to leave. And that's the law right now. So the state needs to reform, Alice, to make it a little more, I don't know if difficult's the right word, but at least give tenants more time to prepare to leave, and perhaps encourage and create incentives themselves that will incentivize them to stay in the rental business, because these are real families and real individuals who are suffering and have high anxiety because they may become our next homeless individuals, and they often are.
Do you hear many stories about that? Do people come and talk to you about that?
All the time. We are dealing with 3 buildings right now owned by an LLC, and we are working directly with the tenants to keep them housed. What we're able to do, if they meet certain criteria, and that is if they're seniors or if there's a disability involved, we can automatically keep them in that unit for an additional year. That gives us a year to help them find new lodging. But this law is being utilized across the city in the thousands. So we can't adequately build fast enough to then rapidly rehouse people who are getting Ellised out of their buildings. The other one, which we've made some progress on, is Costa-Hawkins. That law prohibits the city of Los Angeles from adding to our rent-stabilized ordinance inventory of all apartments built after October of 1978. So I've been lamenting for years that we are prohibited by state law from advancing that timeline, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. Recently, though, the state did enact a new law which only allows property owners who rent to increase no more than 5% plus consumer price index. That still allows a rental property owner to increase the rent fairly significantly, but it's better than having no tools whatsoever beyond Costa-Hawkins. And that means that people who live in buildings built before 2004 have protections that they didn't have previously. That's going to help, and that's a step in the right direction, but we're going to need more from the state.
Yes. Do you have any idea how many units there are throughout the city?
In general, it's 600 and some odd thousand.
That would be in this category.
There are 600 and some odd thousand units covered under RSO. That's a lot for a city of 4 million. But those are diminishing every year. If it hasn't already dropped below 6 or even 500,000, because the real estate market has been hot for a while now. There's been lots of buildings being sold and resold and lots of condo conversions. The state makes it real easy to do that, and we're beholden to state law. A lot of my constituents are frustrated because I'm the face of the city for the district I represent, and they'll pound on my door saying, do something, do something. Meanwhile, I'm in Sacramento twice so far this summer lobbying for these reforms. So I'm encouraging everyone to write your state legislator that I'm working with. I'm working with the whole California delegation at this point to get more additional funding for the production of permanent supportive housing, but also to reform the Ellis Act, and now to a lesser degree Costa-Hawkins, but we do have this new tool that the state has provided. Like I said, it's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the units that are covered by covenants with the city.
Right.
How do we increase our supply of affordable housing through this program?
Right. So covenants are part of the determination for approvals for a project. So it's a legal document. Covenants now are required by city law to go for 55 years, meaning if a rental unit is built for 55 years, it is covenanted to stay rent stabilized. That is one of the ordinances that I have enacted as council member for the city of Los Angeles back in 2014. I think it was adopted in 2016 finally. That we can't no one can legally do covenants less than 55 years in the city of Los Angeles. That means that if someone rents an apartment and they live in one of the socioeconomic categories, say you're a family or an individual that makes $30,000 a year, you then can't legally be charged more than 30% of your annual income for rent. So that means that you can't legally be required to pay more than $700 or $800 for the unit you live in. That's what we mean by rent covenanted, rent stabilized units. Now, there's the whole category. Sometimes they'll do 100% of average monthly income. Or sometimes they'll do 30%, 40, 50. There's our degrees, right? All the way from workforce to poverty. And so we in my district are building in the hundreds, if not thousands, of units of rent covenanted affordable housing because we know how to do it. That's something that I require of developers when they come to me for any project that needs any sort of variance or general plan amendment. I have the benefit because people want to build in the 13th district. It's an urban core district. It's Hollywood. It's near downtown. It's Silver Lake. It's hip and cool. So there's a desire to build and live in the 13th district. But we need that production across the city, not just in the district I represent. And if we could do that, we would have a different, entirely different profile of affordability and the availability of affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles. So I've been, just harping on this for 6 years of creating tools, requirements, negotiating with developers and builders to increase our inventory. And we need to do that across the city.
So many people out there think that really nothing is done because they see so many people on the street. Yes. Can you give us, I know you touched upon this, but just generally, where are we now with bridge housing and with other types of housing in Los Angeles for the homeless?
Sure. We're heading toward over 20 bridge housing sites. Right now, we have a handful of them open. We have 2 in my district, and 1 is about to double in capacity, which will get us to over 200 beds in the 13th district for bridge housing. We also have, let's talk about my district first, and then I'll widen the lens. We also have 2 safe parking sites with a 3rd coming to Echo Park. We have the very first HHH project that will open within months now in the 13th district. That's an additional 187 units of permanent supportive housing for the homeless. In the committee that I chair, we have now allocated our entire $1.2 billion for permanent supportive housing that gets us over the 10,000 unit mark. And then we have moved forward an additional 1,001 units through an innovation fund within that money. And that means build faster, cheaper, build differently than we're used to the traditional way. So what all this means is that in terms of what people see in their neighborhood, in the commercial corridors, in some of our parks, certainly downtown and all across the city, homeless encampments, under bridges, etc. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have over 36,000 people who are homeless. Once these units begin coming online, and it's happening now, we're putting people by the hundreds now into bridge housing. That's the temporary category. And then we're going to be putting thousands of people into this permanent supportive housing within months, within years. In a few short years, we'll have 2,000, 3,000 units. And when we start getting to where we're opening 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and up to the 10,000 units that are in the pipeline, there should be a visible decrease to Angelenos as they navigate through the city. I talked about 10,000 units, and I talked about 36,000 homeless people in the city of Los Angeles. We need more. We need more housing. It's numbers. It's a humanitarian crisis, but it's numbers. So that's why I am lobbying Sacramento to meet us halfway with providing a match. I want another $1.2 billion, and I want it to come from the state. And the reason I feel confident in making that request and articulating that justification is that the city of Los Angeles is the only city in the entire state that has created a fund to house people who are homeless. Sacramento recently approved a tax, and they're going to get in the game themselves, and there are measures pending in San Jose and San Francisco. The county of Los Angeles has half of the homeless population in the state of California. The state of California has half of the homeless population in the United States. If the city and city voters thank you for approving HHH, that gives me the justification to make our local delegation, the county assembly members and state senators, to move a bill forward that the governor will sign, and I'm meeting with the governor's office too, 3 meetings so far, that will effectuate a match, a merit-based approach to the state funding that I hope they will allocate next year. I don't want a blank check. I don't expect a blank check. But what I'd like to see is as we open these units of permanent supportive housing and start housing people, I want the state to match us so that we can continue building up to 20,000 units. When we can build 20,000 units, we're getting close to housing 36,000 people. Whether you hate the idea, love the idea, whether people judge it good, bad, or ugly, if we want to house people who are experiencing homelessness, we have to get them under a roof and we have to get them well. And what does getting well mean? That means that a third of people who are experiencing mental health issues can have services where they live. It means people, and it's a high number, it's in the thousands and thousands of people who are facing addiction issues and alcoholism. It's real out in the streets. I'm not going to paper over anything. We can house them and get them treatment where they live. And I think that the vote of HHH in 2016 gave me a job, and I take that job very seriously. I ask for people to be patient, but as I mentioned, the production is happening now. We will reach that 10,000 units, and within probably 5 or 6 years, not 10.
You mentioned, of course, services for various groups, including those who have mental illness and substance abuse. Are there a lot of services for these individuals?
There are.
Yes.
There's lots of services for people who are experiencing alcoholism and substance abuse. There is a resistance. There is a universe of people who are resistant who are homeless. It's a fact. A lot of people don't like it when I say that, but it is true. I've been out there. I've talked with people. I talked with a man who was about my age, probably in his 50s, a couple of years ago at an event that I was doing in my district. And he started helping us clean up around his tent. And I said, you know, I have a service provider here who we could get you on a pathway to a permanent home if you would like. He said, nope, not for me. I've been home free for 30 years and I want to stay that way. I said, well, okay, the offer stands and thank you for helping us clean up today. I'm not going to judge him. He has his own reasons. But we need to consistently reach out to people like that because we also have to earn their trust, and that's an issue as well. My whole thinking is not about giving up on people. It's about being relentless in approaching them and then making available the resources and the housing inventory so that people have somewhere to go.
Now, I understand that you recently convened a summit on poverty and homelessness, etc. Tell us a little bit more about that and what you're hearing from those who came to listen in.
Sure. So, last Friday, I worked with our own Housing Community Investment Department to host the first ever Summit on Poverty that was really brought forward by a city council member. And so I convened the meeting. It was a day-long summit, and we brought together for the very first time nonprofits and agencies that help and advocate for people who are experiencing homelessness and poverty, along with business leaders, job creators, job providers, our unions, our trades, our chambers of commerce. And those two groups don't traditionally sit at the table together. But it's time to put aside all barriers, imagined or real or otherwise, because the people I talk to want to solve this crisis. And we need to bring everyone together and take a look at the fundamental causes of poverty in the neighborhoods where we already know it's experienced and has been for decades. So I don't want to run away or dodge or avoid the issue. I want to face it head on. And it's not going to be easy, but the attendees, it was fascinating. I've heard nothing but positive feedback. We want to do more of this. And it isn't about just sitting around tables all day, having, conversations about the causes and, circumstances of poverty. It's about generating a report from the consultant that we brought aboard so that we can synthesize real ideas that I can turn into policy, run through the council, and have signed by the mayor. So we can bring investment and attention to the neighborhoods that have been historically marginalized and completely overlooked in good times and in bad. We know where the pockets of poverty are. There are around 12 census tracts in the city of Los Angeles, I know exactly where they are, where we have entrenched poverty. Let's bring the resources right to the door. Now, in relation to poverty, you have to be really careful. We're human beings. No matter if you're living in poverty or if you're a multimillionaire, we all have pride. Humans have dignity. They want dignity. You can't just hit someone over the head like, I'm doing all this for you, aren't you lucky? It has to be a very sensitive, thoughtful approach. What I know is that people want opportunity. And I want to bring all of the folks who can provide that and say, here's what we have. We are hiring because we need workers. I want companies that are looking at what we're doing to say, you know, in Los Angeles, they're kind of addressing this. And, you know what, let's think about opening our firm in South LA or the North Valley or Boyle Heights or East Hollywood, because they are training the workforce. We know that Los Angeles is the place where people want to be. I want to elevate this effort so everyone knows about it, because more people are going to care more deeply about it. And that's the thing about addressing poverty. If you've ever experienced it, you know that it's just all about creating opportunity. And so that people can have their dignity, you know, you give a helping hand and, you know, you help lift people up, but they take ownership of their own destiny and want to provide for their families. And that's the kind of dignity we need to offer people.
I have two more questions
Sure.
for you. First of all, we talked about the fact that California has a disproportionately high number of homeless individuals. Do you have any idea why California is so vulnerable?
There are a lot of reasons. I visit Covenant House in Hollywood, and Covenant House specializes in housing and sheltering youth. A lot of runaway youth. I talked to a man from Ohio, a young man from Ohio who moved out here to be a rap star. He immediately fell in hard times and ended up homeless on the streets. And he was being, he was at Covenant House receiving services to help get him back on track. And so we need to create job ladders for people who come here, fall upon hard times. That's one category, and that is not uncommon. I moved here with $500. What would have happened if I hadn't landed on my feet? I might have been that young man from Ohio. We could all have been that. And then, of course, people move here. There are a lot of runaway youth who come to Los Angeles. And then people who come here and just fall on hard times. We know that the weather is better in Los Angeles. It's not a terrible place to struggle, right? Like some of the East Coast cities are that have really cold winters. But there's also a lot of myth surrounding this issue, because the overwhelming majority of people who find themselves homeless come from right here in this region. We're not, people by and large, states, cities, they're not outsourcing their homelessness to Los Angeles. It's overwhelmingly people from this region who end up homeless in Los Angeles.
So the next question is, what can we do as neighbors, as community members? How can we get involved to solve this problem?
Go take a look at a number of projects where people who are formerly homeless are now living in beautiful, well-managed buildings like Link Housing over at Lucas and Beverly in the 13th District. Go take a look at that facility. You would think it's market rate, it has views, it's beautiful, and the families that live there were formerly homeless. Support these types of projects in your neighborhood. We recently had a big fight for a project in Echo Park, at the epicenter of where homelessness resides in Echo Park. And I want to see people be more supportive of this and know that people like me and my colleagues will work with project teams to build really nice, well-designed facilities where we can get people stabilized and at the same time actually improve the look and feel of the community.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for your information, and your hard work.
I appreciate it very much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of LA Currents. I'm Saida Pagan.